What's up, y'all? It's part 7 in this bad boy. We are in this thing. Brazer de Bourbourg, the 4 letters, the responses, and everything that is going on, the translations of what he's figured out after an extensive amount of time of research. Again, not much conjecture I can put into this one. This is just a translation, but again, some very, very deep information. So let's get into it. In the following month, Ochpanitzli, the enlargement, which Spanish commenters render as alimpiamiento, sweeping, the Mexicans celebrated the beginning of the great sweeping of the land of the crescent by the invading waters. This deeply meaningful word indicated that it was then that the volcano had torn its vast region into 4 parts, like a nail tears a sheet of paper. Och pan is tli, the life of the nail on the expanse, or the life scratching, splitting the extended surface. This explains the claw and the mountain, or the mournful sign. Accessories of the broom in the Bahan manuscript, which the Honorable General could not fathom. 1. With the month Ochpanitzli, the great 80-day fast began, during which preparations were made to solemnize the approach of this immense catastrophe and the subsequent resurrection. The god Huitzil Opochli, the left-handed hummingbird, was the main focus of all the festivities during this period, but the month Quecholi, preceding the cataclysm and resurrection, was especially dedicated to him. Mysterious sacrifices were offered to him, as you can see in Sahagun's descriptions. 2. This was because this god, the last manifestation of Quetzalcoatl as a volcano, or his third main incarnation, symbolized the conquering fire in the reborn nature following the cataclysm. He was associated with the curious ceremony of the bamboo and the hummingbird, a type of all tales concerning the phoenix. This bamboo, with 9 knots, an image of the volcano, was ceremoniously placed in the temple courtyard. Numerous objects were hung on it, some alluding to the waves of the sea, others to the specific attributes of this warlike deity. At the upper end of the reed they attached a sort of cotton ball in the shape of St. Andrew's cross, from which hung a dead hummingbird, symbolizing extinguished fire. Therefore, recall what I mentioned earlier about the phoenix burying its father's body, and consider that the name Huitzilhuapochtli, the left-handed hummingbird, of this fearsome god of the Mexican conceals under this interpretation the more literal meaning of movement of smoke, of the way escaping from the spear, meaning from the summit of the mountain. Around the hummingbird they suspended white heron feathers coated with turpentine, representing steam. In this state, the bamboo with the dead bird was placed on the vessel carved into one of the large round stones called Kua'a Sicalco, meaning vessel of the central heat of the tree, symbolizing the crater on the crescent, and it was burned along with its accessories. This is the true origin of the phoenix death. A few days after this ceremony, those related to the death of the crescent god began, which were of lesser importance in Mexico than the ones commemorating the resurrection of Huitzilhuapochtli, celebrated in the month Paquetzalitzli, although they were also observed with great solemnity. This festival was called the descent of the gods to the underworld. It started on the first day of this month and ended on the 5th, corresponding to November 13th. Remarkably, Monsieur, it was on the 17th day of the month of Atir, also corresponding to November 13th, that the Egyptians, according to Plutarch, celebrated the feast of Osiris. In Yucatan, where the worship of Kukulkan, i.e. Quetzalcoatl, predominated over the god of fire, the anniversary of his descent was celebrated with the utmost solemnity, similar to the preparations for Huitzilhuapochtli's anniversary in Mexico. The festival began on the last day of the month Shul, he descended, and on the first day of the month Yaxkiji, new sun, November 13th, they celebrated the arrival of the water deity Ixmol, a name that Landa translates as La Legadera, likely referring to the one who causes water to arrive. On this day, they dyed everything in blue, the color of water. including all objects commonly used in temples and houses, and even the hands and faces of young children, symbolizing the drowned earth or the appearance of islands and rocks, children of the ocean, who would take its place. It was on the evening of November the 12th that the great volcano of Nanahualto had disappeared beneath the waves, and at dawn on the 13th the crescent, symbolized by Metzli, an object of many interesting myths, had followed its companion into the abyss. Section 8. Isn't this fearsome god symbolizing the volcano the one referred to by the Vedic poet? 1. When he said, "The grandson of the waters rose in the firmament above the curved, enveloped in lightning, immense, shining like gold, he extended around, carrying with ease the sublimity of his glory." But I understand all too well, upon seeing this text and many similar ones, the difficulty faced by commentators of this sacred book when translating such obscure verses. Wilson, despite the assistance provided by Hindu scholars, admits that his interpretations are far from satisfying. Here, for example, it is evident that the reference is not to rivers with regards to the curved, but to the curve of the crescent. The scholar, Sayana, himself, either did not understand the ancient meaning of the Veda or did not find it suitable to elucidate the mysteries for his readers. The interpretation of the legend of Nanahualto, along with the comments I find in the hieroglyphs of Metzli, is sufficient to dispel all doubts. Furthermore, compare the story of Samba, son of Krishna, afflicted with leprosy, which can only be cured by the actions of their rising sun. Tell me if this is not another reminiscence of Nanahualto. 1. He is also the one hidden in the watery depths, appearing as flames above the waters, which Wilson believes could be applied to the existence of an underwater volcano, according to Vishnu Purana. 2. Agni, exclaims the Vedic poet. 3. Quote, Agni, the head of the sky and the navel of the earth, became the regulator of the earth and the heavens. All the gods engendered you, O Vaiswarnara, in the form of light, for the venerable sage. Unquote. I could endlessly multiply quotations where Agni alternatively appears in the roles of Nanahualto and Quetzalcoatl. If he alarms all the other gods when, emerging from the depths of the ocean, he is recognized as the first one, absorbing all the gods he kills, meaning all the volcanoes that fall silent in his presence. As a priest in the role of the second, he becomes the minister and pontiff par excellence. In this sense, Nanahualto is his son, engendered without the aid of a woman, according to a previously mentioned document, and he willingly offers himself to the flames, taking on the form of the victim to become his own sacrifice. For it is his death that will give life to the world. From his ashes will be reborn the phoenix, an image of the sun, the life of the material world. From this perspective, Nanahualto is no longer just the sinner who bears the punishment for his own transgressions. He becomes the expiatory victim on behalf of all in carrying the sins of others, like the scapegoat of the Hebrews, a sublime doctrine that seems to have been inspired in the nations in the view of the mourning of nature, as a prophecy of the death of the Redeemer. These two myths, although stemming from the same source and concerning the same material fact, essentially differ in many respects. The legends related to them, conceived in a completely distinct order of ideas, seem, as I have hinted earlier, to have originally represented two sects, perhaps two distinct races, having simultaneously witnessed the great drama of the cataclysm and living at a short distance from each other. This is a fact that I always seem to discern in the whole of these myths, the original difference of which must have later been a powerful cause of division and struggles, although they had to subsequently blend through an agreement between the victors and the vanquished. Such events had to naturally occur before the era when the nations that had received these stories dispersed to different parts of the globe, carrying them along. The Popol Vuh, on its part, particularly refers to the whites and blacks who lived in great numbers towards the Orient, peaceful and without contention, speaking a single language, before the worship of wood and stone, or rather of the tree and the power of water, or the divinized breath, that is, before the establishment of idolatry. I will return later to this question, which is of great historical and moral interest, and for which this document offers more than one valuable piece of information. In the meantime, I think it appropriate to continue making you aware of the examination of the different parts of the Mexican legend that present the most direct connections with the traditions of our continent. In particular, there is an image that I have mentioned to you and which seems timely to revisit now. It is that of the Yoni Lingam, which has been the source of a cult equally obscene in Mexico as in Egypt and India. This image, which you can compare to those in Mr. Gugnot's plates, is rendered in the Mexican language by the word acaro, the name of the first of the 4 annual signs of the calendar. It is the cane, the reed, or bamboo, usually depicted by the following image. The image that he's speaking of right here is this one right here, y'all. The bamboo, what's also been turned into maize, right? Been interpreted as maize. However, acaro does not mean just water, but also cane. It is the one that rises in it, as seen in the hieroglyph. It primarily signifies, in its radical meaning, the vitality of the heat of water, a caro, for a catli, a cali, the primitive cal, heat, which is found in Molina only in compound words, having become figuratively first, and then in reality the house, that which we are, for it is the heat in which and by which we exist. This is why the interpreters of Motolania, in explaining their paintings to him, read this sign akal, and translated it with the words casad por agua, house in the water. Hence, the profound meaning of Tio Kali, an expression that not only conveys the idea of the house of God, the temple, but also that of the volcano, Ti O Kali. The heat of the stone path for the Tio Kali was the pyramid, whose sufficiently significant name in Greek and Mexican indicated that its purpose was to commemorate the memory of the ancient American volcanoes. The pyramid, whose conical shape, mysterious entrance, and the fire that was lit at the top also recalled the male and female idea, symbolized in the sign acaro. In the Mayan language, the calendar sign corresponding to the Mexican acaro is bin, whose meaning is no less significant. The enclosed or hidden path, alluding to the occult movement of the fire within the Earth's core. However, the one that corresponds most directly to the idea in hieroglyph of acaro is ahau, the one of gas, represented in the hieroglyph by a wing. It's the sign of the locality and, in its entirety, the sign yakskin, the vigor of the sun or fire. Ahau is the title par excellence of priests and kings, translated by the Spaniards as Lord, Senior, in which Ximenez derives from the cane, used as a possessive particle, and au, the chain, necklace, or seed, meaning the one with the necklace, the one who has the right to wear one, like kings, etc. However, au is also a compound word of water, and u, necklace or chain, which also expresses, like the Mexican o, the idea of a surface, a circumscribed place. Thus, ahau is the cane, the stalk and the water of the surface, the master, the chief of the volcanic chain, the necklace of pearls, each a subterranean hearth, a link in the invisible chain that its masters shakes in the bowels of the worlds. This is how this master, the supreme fire, thus controls all parts of the earth, shaking or devastating them at will, like Jupiter at Olympus, who, with the golden chain, binds all the powers and bodies of the universe. Ahau is the male with the female, the one who possesses, who gives and spreads the seed. That's why if from ahau you make aua, you get the sower. You get everything that is domesticated, man, bird, or quadruped. Hence, a host of verbs that are most interesting to study. It is from this term, cane or bamboo, the substantial image of the volcano, that Agni in the Veda gets his designation as bamboo, which Wilson finds so difficult to apply to this deity. Moreover, if you consider the various incidents related to the existence, number, and mode of appearance of fire, whose explanation is provided in the Toltec history, you will discover the reason for a multitude of epithets assigned to Agni, as to Indra, which until now have appeared to interpreters as insoluble enigmas. When the 14 worlds were formed, say the national poems with the axis that traverses them, and below them the mountain Galaya, hot water that walks, then appeared on the summit of this last the triangle Volneye in the Yoni, the lingam or Siva lingam. This lingam, tree of life, had 3 barks. The first and most outer was Brahma, the middle one Vishnu, the innermost, the tenderest, Shiva. And when the 3 gods had detached themselves, there remained in the triangle only the bare stalk, henceforth under the protection of Shiva. Well, sir, take a moment to look at this variant of the Ahau sign from the Codex Borgia and see if you do not find there Shiva in the necklace or the triangle, with the significant barks from which he sheds as he rises. This was also alluded to by the branching of the tree consecrated to Xiuhtecutli, which was burned every 4 years in Mexico. Move on to the sacred name of Yoni. You have its most complete interpretation in the Mexican verb yoma, expressing the idea of carnal pleasure by making it in the past tense yon or yoni, hence the name Yonio, the path of pleasure, given to sacred cakes in the shape of the female sex, which were offered during the festivals of the month Tepehutu, the winds of the mountain Ehecatontin, images of volcanoes and clouds that accumulate at their summit. If you take the name of Kali, the terrible Indian goddess, you find its equivalent without trouble in the very name of the famous bamboo Akali or Akaru. It's the devouring heat, and the cow that is consecrated to it seen in the hieroglyph of the swallowed earth that I have already so often spoken to you about. You can therefore, with the help of these details, reconstruct the Mount Meru, signified by this great cone that was raised by the fires of Nanahuatl shortly before erupting definitely, the phallus of Shiva, Ahau, elongated, flaming, which violently pierces the earth or the sheer mountain, as expressed in the paintings, but especially strikingly in the cartoons of Palenque, according to the plates of Stevens and Waldeck. This is also the sign of Tolpitzin, our noble son, the royal title of one of the personifications of Quetzalcoatl, whose meaning is no less profound than all the others. Tolpitzin, the suspended, launched jet of heat, taking that of Si Akaro, a cane, and manifesting itself in a mountain out of the belly of his mother, as you have seen above. Section 9. Who would not recognize in all these images the archetype of Bacchus, emerging amidst flames from the thigh of Jupiter, like Shiva from Meru? Dionysus is born of fire. What is the thyrsus he holds in his hand, if not always the same symbol, and in the ivy that surrounds it, and with which he is crowned? The tortoise path carved by the fire, hence the root ip, identical with the queche gem, to twist the path, hence also the sword, often hidden under the ivy, the devouring fire, the origin of the titles flamboyant and bramios, resounding, that were given to him, naplo viok, hidden in the column, and many other analogues, which can only be explained with the help of Teo Amoxley. If he is called the son of the bull, nothing is simpler, since he is born of the earth, whose figure, that of a cow or a bull, alternatively brings us back to the myths of India or Persia. The horns he wears are those of this bull. They are the 2 horns formed by the crescent of the submerged region. The torches carried by the Maenad in front of him are the 2 volcanoes lit before the thigh where Bacchus was enclosed finally burst open to give birth. The cup carried by the satyr behind, filled with generous wine, is the cup of Quetzalcoatl, intoxicating himself with the juice of the agave. It is the crater where the foaming lava overflows. It is the vase into which the tumultuous ocean plunges. If he is given the name of Liberator, it is because, by his appearance in the volcanoes he opens, he has freed the earth from the bonds that tormented it, by exhaling the breaths that internally upheaved it. That's why this name of Liberator suits him so truly. In fact, it's just an appropriation of the name given to Apollo Lysias, this god being, like the Tezcatlipoca of the Mexicans, just one of the aspects of the Bacchus myth. the union of water and the fire on the funeral fire of Nanahualto. Both have as their primitive I'm and not look or Lucy and as their root U. You in Nanahualto, the way, the surface, of which I spoke to you earlier. You, the moon in Maya, hence ul, to come, to flow, like water, a word which, exchanging with ol, then gives the meaning of everything that is soft, in particular the hair of the sexual parts, and of that very part in women in several languages of the Mexican group. From there, even could have come the word luna, which precisely means the mother sex. Lu, with the suffix im, makes lum, to amass soft earth, in Quechua, to knead it, and lu ori, everything surrounding the sex, the matrix, the center, and in Maya language, the earth, according to its common meaning. But the center, the softness of the earthly matrix, the hearth of the world, the elements softened, melted in its center. This is where the second meaning of the word lu comes from in Quechua language, the breath that animates, that fans the fire, and then lu, the howling, the distant roaring, all these things expressed, with a multitude of others, in the same monosyllable, since the day the mother par excellence, the earth, cracked open her matrix under the pressure of internal fires, launching the softness of the lava, and collapsed under the shock of the roaring waves with the howlings of a jackal. Does all this not sufficiently explain why the lune, the wolf, Lupercus, Lycius, come to be confused with their etymologies and their derivatives in a single etymology, which the Greeks could not possibly make sense of, that of the cataclysm that explains everything and whose symbols they had too greatly disfigured in the refinements of art? Already, says Mr. Guignot, in his translation of Cruiser's symbolism, quote, antiquity was divided on the meaning of this surname, given not only to Apollo but also to Artemis. It is very probable that the Greek name for wolf is the origin, for Lycia itself, from which it could be derived, is called the land of wolves by the ancients. What seems certain is that the Greeks found attached to this animal both the idea and images of an important branch of religions. Following their custom, they sought to account for it according to their own language. They had received from outside the connection of the two ideas of wolf and sun. They tried to find it in relationship between the words lukos, wolf, the sun, god wolf, and luki, the light that appears in the morning. This connection, you see, sir, is naturally found in the root that the Quechua language gives us. You discover there the original relationship between Bacchus and Apollo, as well as that of the former with the moon, whose crescent contains the fires, symbolized in one, and the water in the other, until its destruction. The transformations of the first into a goat, a kid, are just allusions to the hieroglyph of the submerged earth. From the same image comes the mother idea of the donkey of Silenus, playing such a major role in the processions of Bacchus. It is to the roarings of the earth ready to give birth to the volcanic god, roarings compared to the voice of a donkey heard braying in the Veda, that we must attribute these expressions of the Indian poet, which interpreters find so difficult to account for. It is unnecessary, after all this, to insist on the fiction that represents this god sewn into the thigh of Jupiter. This thigh you recognize in the part of Nanahualto's body where the Mexican legend places the source of an ailment, usually arising at the bottom of the thigh, which is itself but the upper form of the leg, Metzli, the crescent, the moon, mother and daughter of Bacchus, of the fire that animated it. Thus, Bacchus, or Nanahualto, is the fire, or rather, the combination of the three cosmogonic elements, fire, water, and air, in the fourth, in the earth of Quetzalcoatl, enclosed deep in the underground abyss before bursting outwards. This combination is also Brahma, the absolute unity of Hindu theology, successfully emanating under three different aspects and whose body is Brahma, that is, the water of Brahma, the ocean, the primal water, emanating from his word, issued from his first word, Om, which is both the submerged continent, the volcanic tree he proclaimed, whose fire symbolizes Bacchus, who is the word of Jupiter's thigh, and the figure of the water in which he drowned. Only with the help of the hieroglyphs that have served as a template for all these transcendental ideas can one understand how the philosophical schools have successfully engendered the various systems of pagan antiquity. Look at number 4. of plate 4, tome 4 by Guignot, reproduced from North in Millier's collection. And in this image, strange in so many respects, we find, through the use of Mexican hieroglyphs, the explanation of all the traits that compose it. It's the image of according to these two scholars. Well, what do you see? At the bottom, the sea and the islands, among which rises Meru, supported by the hands of a great body invisible under clouds of smoke. The main sign is the Yoni Lingam, appearing in the center. Then at the top, forming a strange head, a wavy smoke-like hair. The nose is formed by a tree trunk, the com, whose upper branches cover as eyebrows, two rounds surrounded by rays, depicting the eyes. These are two craters, or more probably, the two great hemispheres of the gourd, which are, indeed, the second revelation of Brahma, in the sense that the appearance of the Atlantic and the islands closely follow that of the first word, symbolizing the volcano of Nanahualto. These are the two scales of the balance in the Brahmic zodiac, rightly named Tula or Doula, a distant memory of the times when this zodiac had its origin. I return to the myth of Bacchus, and if the limits of this letter allowed, I would show you how, even to the smallest details concerning him, how all the names related to it concur in establishing his Western and American origin.
Concur in establishing his Western and American origin.
His very name, Bacchus, whose etymology has been so often and vainly sought, provides one of the most curious proofs. Ba-kush, pronounced X as sh, heart, center, life of the mole, or of the earth, that is, of the underground hearth, from where all volcanoes originated, Ba being a very remarkable particle of the Quiche language, which I have already had occasion to discuss with you several times, which I will not speak more of at this moment, my intention being to draw your attention to it a little further on. The same name can also be interpreted as Bak-ox, the heart of the bone, the core, the foundation, Bak-ox, the three of the foundation, or Bak-ox, the breath, the respiration, the life of the foundation. All ideas, as you see, that agree very well with that of the cataclysm and the volcanoes. I will add here that the explanation of the toys of the infant Dionysus is no less significant. The dice, with their black spots on a white background, become alternatively 2, 3, 7, 9, 12, etc., represent the stigmata, indicators of volcanoes, the various numbers of the Toltec or Chichimex chiefs. The ball is the winged globe, also frequent in Mexican paintings as in those of Egypt, sometimes black, red, or white, according to whether it signifies fire, smoke, water, or vapor. The apples are an allusion to the same subject, or the symbol of the two testicles of the phallus, represented in the two gulfs, which elsewhere become the mirror of the god. The wool is the sign of the smoke of volcanoes, or of the water of the sea. The hoop is the circle of the gulf of the moon, or the mystical vase. The spinning top, spinning on itself, is the world convulsively agitated by internal fire. It is especially the earth of the crescent, rolling like the potter's wheel before descending to the bottom of the abyss. The sphere is this other globe, symbolizing the two gulfs before the catastrophe, and compared, as I have shown elsewhere, to the two halves of a gourd, still whole like the gaping mouth of a volcano, already split, ready to open completely to vomit the jet of fire. The exaltation, or enchanted palm of the Mayas, the tahax, the spear or flint of the Quiches, the tacparo of the Mexicans. The first symbol of the word emanated from the mouth of Fatra, according to the transcendental philosophy of later times. You see, the earth here is identified with the fire it is about to vomit. Quetzalcoatl with Ijacaro, who, on the fire, that is, on the crater, becomes Nanahualto. That is why the same sign alternatively takes, in the documents, the round shape of a sphere or an elongated figure of a sphere, point, symbol of the first jet of the volcano. It is also the image of the body of Zagreus that the Titans are preparing to tear apart. Please note the cross that manifests itself on the sphere and on the lance. It is trembled like a crevice of a terrain that splits by heat or by the effect of underground oscillation. This is the original type of the cross of St. Andrew, of the Nahui Olin, Donatia, of the Nahuatl language. sign of the earthquake in all Mexican paintings, but it is also the sign of the sun in its four movements, which refers in the astronomy of Mexico to the four movements of the solstices and equinoxes. It is this cross that Cruiser had observed on the head of an image of the Artemis of Ephesus, and of which he wondered, not without reason, albeit with some uncertainty, quote, "Does it mark, as has been thought, the intersection of the ecliptic and the equator at the equinoctial points? And as these points from the passage from one world to another, according to the doctrine of the transmigration of souls, wouldn't this be a new characteristic symbol of the powerful goddess who reigns over life and death?" Indeed, this symbol was undoubtedly significant both in Ephesus and in Mexico, as well as in Egypt, where it often appears in temple sculptures crossing the flanks of a lion. If the Artemis of Ephesus, whose attributes generally alluded to fertile earth, bore the cross, it's because this cross, a symbolic sign of an earthquake, as well as the intersection of the ecliptic, actually signified what the words Nahui, Olin, Donatia mean, quote, "the four shakes of rolling fire," unquote, or rather of moving steam, which had torn the garment of Artemis. That is, opened the crust of the globe at the most famous volcano ever. Hence also the meaning of this cross, identical to the sign of this X as we see right here, of the manuscript Bohan, a geometric character of augmentation, of multiplication, in Mexico as in Europe, since it had been the mark of the superiority of this volcano which had multiplied by the abstraction of all others. Perhaps also the French word plus could very well come from the Quechua pul ox or pul os, pul lush, pul los, by contraction, the breath, or the bubbling breath, or, according to the Mexican, pul os or pul os, plos, the center of swelling, of thrust, of ruin, etymologies which, if not the real ones, at least admirably concur with the origin of the sign. Section 10. Do I need to remind you here concerning the myth of Bacchus or Dionysus, of the sword that Aeschylus places in the hands of the latter, a sword of fire, identical with the Mexican tecparo, and the sword of Chrysaor, the man with the golden sword emerging with Pegasus from the blood of Medusa beheaded by Perseus, that is, by fire, Medusa, met ux, or met dos, being the breath, or the king of the crescent, and her head, the peak of the volcanic cone, decapitated by fire. Quote, "It is also from a sword, from the sheath of Perseus' sword, fallen in the place where his capital rose," adds Cruiser. "It's from a mushroom plucked by the hero, devoured by thirst, and which made a beneficent spring gush forth at the same place that frequent puns among the Greeks derived the name Mycenae," unquote. Observe again, here, the resemblance with the myth of Nanahualto and with the chancre, the hidden cause of his ailment. If fungus signifies mushroom in Greek, mu, and mok, from mu, the soft, moist earth, also signify in Quechua mushroom, the first, or handle of a sword. It has the sense of everything that is born and nourished in moisture and heat, of everything that rots, its carrion, its hidden moisture, it's the rot of the tomb. Greek cannot find as much in Sanskrit. What Greek does not further explain is the origin of this famous word, the origin of the mushroom, and the fictions it gave rise to, an origin that is fully provided by the legend of Nanahualto, that of his chancre, from which sprang the sources that formed the Atlantic Ocean. Thus, not only the bright images of Greek fable, but the names of its heroes, the etymology of its most famous cities, all come not from the east, but from the west, from the Atlantic region. If we move from the myth of Bacchus to that of Hercules, under whatever images he presents himself, under whatever forms he wraps himself in Greece, Asia, Egypt, or Libya, you will constantly find in him the same symbols that the Teo Yamoxtli shows in Mexican Tezcatlipoca, identifying with Nanahualto on his fire. Hercules, conqueror of the Lernaean Hydra, is not Tezcatlipoca, extinguishing under his wave the 7 constantly reborn craters like the heads of this monster. In Hercules, cleaning the Augean stables, do you not see the roaring wave that cleans and sweeps? In the Ochpanitsli, on the day of the great sweeping, half of the antediluvian world, Hercules wrapping himself in the robe of Deianira, before throwing himself into the fire, is the wave, wrapped in the flames of the great blaze and the smoke of the volcano with which it identifies by vaporizing. What is Ammon in Egypt, appearing to Hercules in the form of a ram? It is always the same image of the crescent, which I explained to you earlier about Bacchus. Ammon, Hamun, Hamun. You find it again in the Quiche idea of the devouring spider of the abyss, a word you have identically with the same meaning in Egyptian, that is, as the devouring, one of the genii of the Amenti. Besides the phonetic sign with which it is written, you see that it exists in the text with the head of a ram and a black egg. The embryo, from which the fire sprouted. The monosyllable in, which completes the word, hidden or kept thing, gives you for Amen the sense of the mysterious devouring of the abyss, which Egyptologists have made one of the genii of the Amenti of Hades. Now, Hercules is indeed the son of this Hades, as the wave is the daughter of the abyss of the ocean of which it is the surface. That's why Tezcatlipoca was called in Tlaxcalan, Camoxli, the movement of the face, of the mouth, or of the abyss, represented either under the figure of a young man, Telpochtli, the Mexican Apollo, or by the gaping jaws of Cipactli. If the Egyptian Hercules had two faces, they are explained by the double Mediterranean he had opened in the two faces of the cosmic mirror. If he is compared to Phoenician Esmun, it is not only because he is the eighth, like Quetzalcoatl, it's because Esmun in Quiche, Exmun, Shmun, or Ishmun, besides the sense of little servant or slave, also has the meaning of the glutton and the gourmand, and then identifies with the ocean itself, already personified in the grandmother Oxmoco. Finally, if the phoenix is placed in the hand of Hercules, Tezcatlipoca is also represented carrying in his hand sometimes the macaw or the sparrow hawk, symbols of the wave or the hummingbird, when under the name Tlacahuapan, the great sign, or the great flag of water and fire. He makes dance in his hand the nanas, the little dwarf whom Sahagun, recounting the run of Toulon, identifies with Huitzilopochtli. From Egypt, we move to Phoenicia, where we find Hercules under another name. Melkarth, says Mr. Guignot, was the tutelary deity of the powerful Tyre, and the Tyrian navigator spread his cult from island to island and from shore to shore to the farthest reaches of the west, to Gydes, where a perpetual flame burned in his temple, as at Olympia on the altar of Jupiter. Perhaps nowhere on our continent was this cult as alive as Solon. And why? Because instead of having come from the east, it had spread from the distant west, from island to island, archipelago to archipelago, shore to shore, like the roaring wave it symbolized, to the center of Asia, weakening or modifying like a dying wave as it moved away from the places of its cradle, from the islands of the Gulf of Mexico where it had received its first consecration.
From the islands of the Gulf of Mexico where it had received its first consecration.
The partial catastrophes that continued the cataclysm probably for several centuries had not ceased to be felt, and already Hercules had, at Gades, his temple built on a rock amid the waves. To better recall, it seems, the phoenix he carried in his hand, that formidable Teocalli, where he had wrapped himself in the robe of Deianira before engulfing it. But this temple in turn disappeared into the abyss following an earthquake not far from the shores of Gades. Where did the name Melkarth, which the Phoenicians gave to their Hercules, come from? Minter explains it reasonably, I think, from the Hebrew Melech, which he translates as king, and comments as Mercator, but which Mr. Guignot seems to want to apply to the sun traveling its celestial course. This may have been true later, but originally this word, circuiter, expressed the idea of the wave breaking its way in the Caribbean Sea, then turning circularly, separating Cuba from Yucatan, to dig the Gulf of Mexico. Observe, moreover, that the Latin circular itself is a compound word, composed of three Quiche words, literally meaning piercing of the bird on the circular vase, circuitor, or who rapidly turns the embryo of the circular vase. Melkarth has a similar meaning in the same language and can come from mel, to return, a word in which you recognize again the primitive ein, curve, compounded with el, to emerge, and kar, fish, something wriggling or bubbling. Or, if you prefer, from mal or kar, tearing. If we take mal instead of mel, we have malkar, an invisible, marvelous, enchanted wriggling, which can equally relate to fire as to water. In the Nahuatl language, the letter R, not existing, is alternatively replaced by an I or by an L or an I. In this case, malkar would be interpreted as the rotating heat like the wood that is rubbed to light a fire. Hercules himself finds another satisfactory etymology in Quechua, her, the hidden angry fury. Kol, besides a multitude of other meanings, presents first and foremost that of turning, flaming, concentrating. Kol, again, is the resin, any sticky, inflammable material. Now, what else shall I say about Hercules stealing the sacred tripod from Apollo? You recognize it without me saying it. It's the wave breaking the earth, taking for itself the three great Antilles, which it forms by surrounding them. These are, as I have told you, the 3 feet of the mystical vat. These 3 islands are where humanity, having escaped the cataclysm, reconstituted society and opened the new era of civilization. These are, as elegantly stated in the Tlatoani, the 3 stones of the domestic hearth, whose use for 6,000 years has continued to be transmitted from generation to generation among the peoples of America.
For 6,000 years has continued to be transmitted from generation to generation among the peoples of America.
The peoples of America. How often, traveling with the natives in Guatemala, have I not observed this practice when it was necessary to boil water or cook food? It is the first task upon stopping, wherever one may be. 3 roughly equal stones are chosen, gathered in a triangle, fire is kindled, and thus the hearth is made. Then comes the pot filled with water placed on top, and in this simple act you have the representation of several of the deepest myths in history. The 3 stones are the symbols of the 3 islands, perhaps also of 3 volcanoes, the fire under the pot, that of the underground fire, and of the ocean formed by the catastrophe. Open the Mexican documents, taking the paintings reproduced in Kingsborough. Everywhere you will find these images. You will almost always see them in the characteristics of the winged globe of Egypt, of which they are the prototype, and accompanied by the most expressive and speaking details. Section 11. I would never finish if I undertook to explain them all and to show their identity with the details of Greek or Oriental mythology. I therefore jump to one of the least understood allegories, which is usually found in Greece, Egypt, and India, that of the Cercopes, or monkeys. However, this is one of those that Cruiser touched with the most insight when he saw in these animals the object of a fiction related to the volcanic movements of the earth. As for me, I owe the explanation to Mr. Rilliot, who, several months before the latest discoveries I made, assured me by comparing the wonderful tradition of the 2 monkeys of the Popol Vuh to his reading of the Book of the Dead, that these 2 monkeys were the symbols of the uplift of the mountains on a portion of the submerged land before the final catastrophe. Since then, my own research has fully confirmed this observation. It is therefore with the history of the 2 brothers, as told in the Popol Vuh, that I will clarify this important fact. The first names that appear in this part of the sacred book of the Quechuas are those of Xipayaccoc and Ximocan, constantly called the grandfathers and grandmothers of the sun and moon, the supreme enchanters and astrologers, the father and mother, the nurturers of men. Although the former is usually distinguished as the male and husband of the other, both nevertheless bear the sign of the feminine, X, for Ix or she, Ish, she, expressing the idea of the vase, sign of the woman. Both are therefore feminine names, and they are all the more so because they designate expanses of sea. In their correspondence with the 2 great portions of America, Xipayaccoc, or she of the gourd, slipped into the water, indicating North America with the Gulf, at least up to the end of the Mexico, Ximocane, she of the wet serpent's teeth, or buried points, comprising with the Caribbean Sea all of South America. These are, in the Nahuatl language, Zipactono and Hoxomoco, 2 names I will explain later. Just as the two great portions of America make up one land, one continent, with the Gulf of Mexico on one side and the Caribbean Sea on the other, so the two deities make up only one, merging into each other. The Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea, considered elsewhere as the two faces of the mystical mirror, are also seen here as the skirts of the Mother of the Gods, hence the names given to her of Inquieto, the old skirt, or rather the skirt that advances turning, and of Nenama, Tecutli, the old lady, or rather the path that cuts the contour of the Gulf, or estuary, names eminently topographical, in direct relation with those of Tezcatlipoca, and on which I insist for a reason. For if they apply here in a special way to the sea, if they are epithets of the deity containing the two Mediterranean seas, they also apply to the earth, Mother of the Gods, as the mistress of the two inner American seas. So, I hope that y'all are enjoying everything that is coming out of this translation. This is just beautiful. No, I really love Brazil de Bourbourg's work. We can honestly see why he's being quoted by so many authors of this time period when they're doing all this research in the first place. It's really amazing to get this account, to get these understandings of what they knew at this time. That's why I don't like to try and remake videos as though they're my own. Because most of the mainstream ain't even talking about this. They got a whole different interpretation on something that was already known. Is it lost? No, it's here. It just wasn't translated. So we got it. We're gonna keep going. Y'all, catch me in the next one. Part 8 coming up soon. You dig?